Taiwan held its much-anticipated elections on January 13th. The DPP's Ching-te won the presidential race with 40% of the vote. However, the DPP lost its legislative majority, meaning there could be a tough road ahead for the future Lai administration. What can we glean about Taiwan's political future from these election results? I'm Shannon, Tiezzi, editor-in-chief at the Diplomat, and this is Behind the News. I'm joined today by Wei-ting Yen, an assistant professor of government at Franklin and Marshall College, and she's going to help us talk through Taiwan's post-election politics. Wei-ting, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So the election results were a bit of a mixed bag for the DPP. Obviously, it retains the presidency, but the vote share much lower. Tsai Ing-wen won with 57% of the vote in 2020 versus just 40% for Lai this time around. It's also lost its legislative majority. So how would you read these sort of mixed messagings to look at how much support there is for the DPP in Taiwan at the moment?
So a couple of things. First, the turnout rate is indeed lower than the 2020 election. Which is expected because in 2020, there was a Hong Kong factor played in that electoral cycle. So the turnout rate was up to almost 75%. And so it was already expected that we're going to see a lower turnout, which turned out to be 71% turnout rate. And I think it's mainly because it's a less exciting election for Taiwanese people. The second point is that based on the election result, we can see that all the bases kind of go back to their partisan base. The DPP kind of get their core supporter base as well as the KMT. And there is not those votes that came out and voted for Tsai in 2020, a lot of those votes go to the TPP this time. So that's the second point. And in general, the way I would interpret the result is that I think people are clearly giving the DPP a third-term mandate, which is an unprecedented thing in Taiwan's democratic history. I will largely interpret this as an endorsement to Tsai's 8 years of approach in connecting Taiwan to the world and trying to push Taiwan to the world stage to connect politically and economically to more like-minded nations. However, based on the split legislature outcome, we can also see that I think people mainly are endorsing Tsai's or the DPP's approach on foreign policy aspect. So domestic policy-wise, as we saw in this electoral cycle in the campaign, all the attack on the housing price, low wage issues, I think it signals that people are still not completely satisfied with, the DPP's domestic policy. And after 2 terms, 8 years in office, there is a significant portion of citizens that want to see a change, want to impose that check and balance into Taiwan's political system.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned how important the Hong Kong factor was in 2020. It sounds like this year, cross-strait issues important for the presidency, less so for the legislature. Is that accurate, or how decisive were cross-strait and foreign policy issues in this election cycle?
So I would say that since 1996, every election cycle, China is that big factor. So it still matters in this electoral cycle, but it's not the same way as I would say how the international community thinks how it matters. So the international community tend to have this very dichotomous, like binary. If you vote for the KMT, then you are pro-unification or very pro-China. If you're voting for the DPP, then you're pro-independence, you're anti-China. We don't see that binary distinction, I feel, this time, because if you watch closely to their cross-strait policy, all the parties basically vowed to adhere to the ROC Constitution, and all of them basically vowed to maintain the status quo. They differ in terms of the approach they think is suitable for Taiwan to maintain the status quo. But overall, I think because the majority of the Taiwanese people want to maintain the status quo, it kind of serving as a strong constraining force to converge the candidates in this area. And so I think it still matters, just not in the same way, as opposed to say 4 years ago, because Hong Kong was happening. For many people, that one country, two system, framework that Xi Jinping wanted to impose on Taiwan, as he mentioned in his January 2nd speech, was very much on people's mind. So at that point, it was a very survival, there's almost a certain level of regime survival election, which is not in play out in this election.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the TPP, which was the third party contesting the election. Ko-wen-je had one of the strongest performances by a third-party presidential candidate with over 26% of the vote. And perhaps most importantly, the TPP is set up to play kind of a kingmaker role in the legislature, because neither the DPP nor the KMT was able to secure an outright majority. So what might we expect from the TPP moving forward in terms of how it's going to politically position itself and the role it's going to play in the Legislative Yuan?
So in this electoral cycle, we do see I think the TPP's vote share as well as Ko-wen-je's vote share is higher than expected. There are more than 3 million people voting for the TPP. So moving forward, because they have gotten a seat out of the 113 seats legislature, they are indeed in this king-making position. And right now in the political debates, in the news coverage, everybody is talking about who Ko-wen-je, who the TPP is forming alliance with. Is this the KMT or is this the DPP? And I think everything is still up in the air right now. Both the DPP and the KMT are trying to court the TPP. However, one thing I think we need to bear in mind is that TPP hasn't had a very solid policy platform throughout this whole electoral campaign. Ko-wen-je's rhetoric kind of is populist, and it's more about we want to change, return the power to people. We want to have a party turnover. So those are like the campaign slogan. When it comes to real policy stance, it's not very clear what's the core of the policy TPP's policy platform is. And on top of that, because the TPP legislators, their ideology vary from very pro-independence to working with China, and so it is not very clear right now how that's going to play out, whether we will see some internal conflict erupting during the next parliamentary session. And so I think this is a good question, but we kind of have to wait and see how it got played out.
Mm-hmm. Now, Taiwan has essentially been a two-party system since democratization occurred with the DPP and the KMT. We've occasionally seen third parties win seats in the legislature, but they've kind of ebbed away over time. Do you think the TPP actually has staying power? Can it be kind of this third force in Taiwanese politics over the longer term?
So electoral system wise, because with SMD, it is more likely to have a two-party system under the SMD system. We do have a party list, and that's why we see the TPP is winning basically the party list portion of the legislature. And so the electoral system is unfavorable for smaller parties. So we see parties like the TPP, merging with strong popular support in the first couple of years, and then it gradually died down. All the other third parties kind of in this electoral cycle didn't win enough seats to pass the 5% threshold. And so I feel like it remains to be observed. I think the next 2 years will be very crucial to see how TPP, now they got more resources, how are they going to position themselves to really be a viable third party? If not, the voter base of TPP are basically independent voters. The 40% independent voters in Taiwan, they can be green or the so-called light green, light blue voters. They can turn away from TPP if the TPP doesn't position itself clearly in the next couple of years. That's one thing. Second point I would say is that TPP is different from Ko-wen-je. I'm not entirely sure if the TPP will continue to succeed without Ko Wen-je. I think Ko Wen-je obviously has a very charismatic appeal to his voters. His voter base is stronger than I thought, especially if you think about the white-blue failure to make a coalition in November 2023. And I was expecting to see a dip of his support. It did, but then it came back. And so I think his support base it's a solid support base. And so I think regardless of whether the TPP will exist in the future, I think Ko Wen-je will remain in Taiwan's politics in the foreseeable future.
What about the future of the KMT? They have now lost the presidency 3 elections in a row, which, as you stated, has never happened before in Taiwan's democratic history. You know, they won more seats in the legislature, but they still don't have a majority. Where does the party go from here? Is there going to be a stock taking, maybe a change in the leadership, or are they satisfied enough with these election results to just keep the status quo?
So I think the KMT is in a very tricky position in that I think there is a clear internal divide within the KMT. There's more Taiwan-based local, like Hou You-yi is representing that faction. Zhao Shaokang, his VP pick, basically is representing the hardcore blue, the pro-China blue. And we saw the former president Ma Ying-jeou 3 days before the election giving an interview with the German media, basically stating his very pro-China, pro-unification stance, which as far as I know, was a blow for the KMT. And so I think structurally, that's a structural problem for the KMT, and has been the case, but because the Taiwanese population has been, the public opinion has moving further and further away from pro-unification stance, there's very little market for that. But those people are still a big faction inside the KMT. And I think right now they are trying, the local, like the Taiwan base are trying to hold on to the leadership position in the KMT. But we're also seeing, you know, hardcore pro-China forces trying to take down the kind of the local domestic forces within the KMT. And so I think we have to see whether the hardcore pro-China forces coming back dominating the KMT. And if that's the case, the KMT will continue to be marginalized to a point that the TPP may be able to take over the voter base of the KMT.
Thank you, Wei-ting. As you made it very clear, there's a lot to continue to keep an eye on in Taiwan as the legislature takes its seats in February, when Lai's inaugurated in May. So we'll continue to track these issues at the Diplomat. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for everyone at home for tuning in. If you liked this video, please subscribe for more issues of Behind the News, and I hope to see you next time.